Hi everyone, this is Marlene with ERIE News, and today is April 12th, 2022, Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. And let's get right to it. All those weird and unusual stories. Let's start with this first one. This is out of paranormaldailynews.com, titled My Ultimate Encounter with a Demonic Princess. Many people tend to fear, shun, or point-blank deny the reality of demonic low-frequency entities. As a former spiritual scaredy cat turned unwitting advocate for better the devil you know approach to life, I understand how they feel. However, the more I learn about otherworldly, lower realm work performed by highly experienced spiritual warriors such as authentic shamans and other advanced healing practitioners, the stronger and more optimistic I feel about everything. Basic dark occult awareness has also given me a sense of having access to an upper hand in battles between good and evil, and useful tools to help me protect myself and keep my personal frequency safe and strong. So it's probably no coincidence that I recently connected with a courageous spirit releasement practitioner called Dawn. She commented on a video I posted about the hidden world of black magicians, and later said she nearly deleted it because it sounded so crazy, even to her. Fortunately, I understood where she was coming from, primarily because of my shamanic studies with the highly respected and experienced Peruvian curandero, Don Oscar Miro Quesada. He also enlightened many of his Western academic peers about the reality of demonic dimensions at various universities and institutions in the USA. After learning more about Dawn's otherworldly adventures and most intriguing line of work, she agreed to share an overview of her experience on PDN. There's a saying that we aren't given more than we can handle, and I have to say that I can't think of many people who would take on such a task and survive to tell the story. As a spirit releasement practitioner for 15 years, I've been privy to a good many entities and situations. But all that training and experience could not prepare me for the ultimate demonic encounter of my life. I received a call from another practitioner who said he had a request from a client to remove a particularly bothersome entity. The client stated that others had tried to assist but backed off or had no effect. The haunting was still present and couldn't be removed. So I decided to give it a go. Other practitioners and mediums reported that the entity was a female, older, and really stubborn. They also said she might be a witch that passed over because she had a small dog as a familiar. I gleaned as much information from them as possible before taking a closer look, stumped as to why no one could remove the female entity along with her little Toto. I accessed the client's apartment building via remote viewing to see if I could find out what was going on, and yep, there she was. Some had seen her as a most beautiful woman, highly seductive and persuasive, while others saw her as an old woman. When I first viewed her, she used both disguises on me, but then I looked further and saw the shapeshifter for what she was, a succubus, half human, half demon. The practitioners were right. She was not budging. She had firmly planted herself in that spot and was not giving it up. I had no idea at the time that the client was involved in the military and being stalked. He also had ties to the music and porn industry. And I didn't know that succubi are drawn to these types of personalities, or that victims are also highly mind-controlled and abused from an early age. This is often what attracts the attention of these kinds of energy. When I reached out to shamans, healers, and other practitioners for advice on how to remove a succubus, the answer were, you don't, and don't get involved. They seemed either spooked or concerned, and didn't elaborate on their experiences. Having never encountered this type of demon before, I had nothing in my personal experience to either deny or confirm what they were saying. I remote viewed again and confronted the succubus in the astral. We talked, and I thought we had come to an agreement. She would leave and not return. I told her that we would battle should she choose to renege on our agreement, but a short while later she returned. Ordinarily, the client tells me the entity is back, and then I proceed to go in with guides and forcibly remove them without much trouble. This was totally different. My normal response is to maintain equilibrium and complete awareness as to my actions in the astral, but what happened next was a first and the only time that I sensed she was there again without being alerted by the client. I went directly to the building in the astral, with a strong sense of the client being in abject danger. The client had already survived an attempt on their life by poisoning, and I felt the absolute need to protect and act quickly, or the client might end up dead, or worse. The client risked losing all control and becoming the walking dead, like the elites, soul gone, sucked out, and tortured, or used to feed others. My sense of danger heightened as I entered the building, and then something absolutely incredible happened without me influencing the events. I went into full-on warrior shaman mode and was thrust out of my body and into the position of an observer watching my now fully armored astral body going through the apartment in hunting mode. I went straight through the apartment to the bedroom, and there she was. She spotted me and hunkered down into stalking mode with one hand on the floor. She looked at me with incredible hate and hissed. My last words to her were, "You were warned," and she was dealt with. At the time, I had no idea that the succubus was a princess in her realm. When my actions were discovered by her family, all hell broke loose in my world. Nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. Ghosts, demons, hellhounds, black magic, UFOs, the works. I found myself under attack in both covert and not so covert ways. I won a lot of battles, but took on heavy damage, and eventually became so ill that I could no longer work or maintain my business. I spent 2 years in bed, almost dying twice. I was brought back to life by unseen helpers, my guides. At the time, I was not grateful to them for their assistance. In fact, I was angry and thought, how dare you bring me back to endure more of this hell? Who would believe all of these things were happening because I unwittingly eliminated a demonic princess? Even I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, and it was happening to me. I tried to enlist the help of other healers that understood the dynamics involved, but they either couldn't or would go only so far before they got skittish. Some told me outright that it was too dangerous, and I was on my own. Today, however, I'm grateful to my guides, as I found my way out of that dark hole of no return and came out stronger, faster, smarter, and a whole lot wiser. Today, I wouldn't trade this experience for anything because of the lessons learned and the knowledge gained. I know myself and what I can accomplish, and also know my limits. And these gifts are actually the only thing you can take with you when you leave this realm. What advice would I give to another practitioner if they came to me and asked, how do you handle a succubus? My response would be, you don't. Should you decide to take it on, be ready to fight for your life in ways you never imagined. And if you live to tell the story, you have gained information and wisdom beyond your wildest dreams. It is such a rare experience that most won't believe, while a few will envy you, having no idea how hard you had to fight or how much courage you had to summon. Should you decide to fight the good fight, get ready to touch the stars and truly understand who you are and what power you hold, and how incredibly loved you are by the universe. After reading Don's compelling story, I was reminded of how some military veterans use remote viewing to send love vibrations to the enemy to change their vibration until they are vulnerable enough to be taken down. I asked her if she had used a love frequency in her line of work. Love does work if you are dealing with humans. What I do now is address the entities in the humans. It's a pretty cool trick and works like a charm. I see past the humans and leave them alone. I go for the puppet master. The ones that we are currently working on are the main controllers. I realized that picking minions off people was not going to get the job done, and these are the ones that have no plug-in for human emotions. But I was assigning emotions to them. It was almost a fatal mistake on my part, and I think that is why I was spared a couple of times. Guides were like, really, Don, you're not getting it. Use love or yourself to protect. Have mercy for those in pain and compassion for those deserving. All others have made their choice. And when I go into a job of clearing out tunnels or clearing the Vatican or clearing heavily charged negative places, I never pick a fight with the demons there. We go in and change the energy. We find the spell and its charm and undo it. If we are attacked, we defend, but not until. Usually entities there leave because they have been forced by magic to serve. But anything that squats and hisses gets run over. Newly aware that certain bloodline families on Earth are related to specific demons, some even leaving an empty chair at the dinner table for the beloved Satan, Dawn's reference to the family of the succubus prompted me to inquire if all demons have families. Her answer: succubi do have a family structure and bloodlines. They are half human and half demon. They are born and bred for abilities in the structure, sort of like the royal families. They are valued only for their gifts and how well they perform their duties, and they have a strict hierarchy. Some succubi are cast out and roam around on their own if they are not up to par. Usually those take on incubus, male demons, for protection, and as a slave they are forbidden to breed. If they breed without family approval, the child demon is killed if and when it's discovered. The succubus and incubus that created the child without permission will also be destroyed. Before a child is conceived, many rituals are performed to assure good stock and ultimate control. Every once in a while one slips through the cracks, but renegades are never spared if caught. I have a lady that is my ground wire. When I go into the astral, sometimes I go so far out to gather info and work that finding my way back would be very hard. Some go insane if they don't have a grounding person that knows their limits. We have been working together for about 25 years. She is the best. I can fly and know that I will be brought back into 3D without too much trouble. Guides give us suggestions as to where to go to be most effective. If we get stumped, they offer solutions. Letting people know about this realm is so important because so much information about this line of work has been destroyed. Thanks so much for taking the time and interest. In closing, I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the seen and unseen courageous spiritual warriors out there whose vital work continues to bring more truth and light to our world every day. Wow, that's really interesting. Because at the very beginning, this person, Dawn, she said something really interesting, which is that she didn't know, all right, that this client that was asking for this help was into, how can I say it? He or she doesn't specify, was involved in the military, and he had ties to the music and porn industry. And obviously she didn't know that they're drawn to this type of personalities. And that victims are also highly mind controlled and abused from an early age. And that, I have come across that situation where sexual trauma, abuse, sexual, mental, physical, any of those, or a combination when a child does open up a person to attention from dark entities. It almost that I've heard about again, but and for anybody that would ever be involved in that, it's a good idea to find out exactly things about your client. So it makes you wonder if she would have known this at that time. Would she have gone in it to begin with? Or would she have said, no, I'll pass? Or have listened to all this advice that she was given from other healers or people that are into doing the depossessions. Interesting. But, so on the same vein, this is from my site, all right, Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled 40 Years of Exorcisms at a Miami Hospital. And this is really interesting. All right, in 1974, the Sarasota Tribune ran a short article titled Exorcism Daily Occurrence at Miami-Jackson Hospital. Your first thought is this was due to the notorious film The Exorcist, released in 1973. Remember, this is just a year after. 73, Exorcist was released, and here we go, 74. This article has come out. However, according to Dr. Sucdio, the director of the Crisis Intervention Center at Miami-Jackson Hospital at that time, the influx of patients, as many as 900 in 1 month, had nothing to do with the film. He described how patients came in asking for evil spirits to be driven from their body, apparently believing that their symptoms, whether mental or physical, were demonic in their origin. He described where many of these patients, such as Haitians, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and other West Islanders, had a strong cultural belief in the influence of evil spirits. Bahamians complained of zombies or ghosts inside of them that were causing them to hear voices. Other patients believed that they had been hexed even to the point of thinking they would die at a specific time. Dr. Sukteo claimed their symptoms were based in hysteria, but learned not to contradict the patients and just treated them based on their belief. He didn't detail exactly what his treatment methods were, only that it didn't involve any type of exorcism rituals. In 2013, Dr. Benson Dates wrote an article titled A Modern Exorcism, in which he describes his own experiences as a young doctor completing his residency at the same hospital, which served as a teaching hospital for the University of Miami School of Medicine. Part of his training involved caring for sick inmates who were transported to Ward D for their medical care. He retells his experience with a young Cuban named Jose. This inmate was a recent arrestee who appeared to be in some type of catatonic trance. Needles marked tracked his arms, testimony to his use of heroin. He initially thought that Jose was schizophrenic. All he did was sit in a lotus position without interacting with anyone around him. Ron, an ex-military physician's assistant who worked at Ward D at that time, explained to Dr. Dietz that years earlier, an obispo, or bishop, from the Santeria religion, had taught him ceremonies to help the patient. According to Ron, a clue on Jose's fingernails led him to believe what Jose needed was an exorcism instead of a trip to the psych ward. He said the invading spirit was Elegua, a Santeria god, who put a spell on Jose. Dr. Joan Halifax, an anthropology PhD student, who recently gave talks about the belief in curses to the medical residents, was enlisted to help by Dr. Dates. They procured a list of items detailed by Ron and assisted him in carrying out the exorcism in a laundry room where Jose was being housed. Jose's reaction to the exorcism was favorable, and Dr. Dietz could never confirm if it was belief in the power of the ceremony or just the soothing effects of grooming due to close contact with Ron, who accompanied Jose throughout the night before the exorcism. Many months after the ritual, Dr. Dietz learned from Ron that Jose had entered a drug rehab program, but he never heard anything further as to whether Jose was able to overcome his addiction and what became of Ron. Ward D, as described in the story, was demolished in 1995. As you read these articles, you might initially think that all these people suffered from some type of mental illness or were in the throes of an addiction. This, mixed with their cultural backgrounds, make them likely to believe they suffered from some type of supernatural attack. When you total the numbers, hundreds per month back in 1974, it begs the question, were all these patients just imagining they were victims of negative entities or curses, or were they truly engaged in a spiritual war for their souls? Before you think all these cases are tied to superstition fostered by foreign lands, in 2013, a Wyoming woman claimed she suffered a heart attack after being sprayed with holy water during an exorcism ritual, as reported by the Washington Times. Wyoming 2013 is years and hundreds of miles removed from 1970s Miami. How true to Hollywood's version are negative influence from spiritual or demonic attachments? Possibly their presence is not identified by all the theatrics that sensational movies present to the public as signs that a person is possessed. The indicators can be more subtle, insidious, and perverse. For example, Jose, that catatonic patient from Dr. Date's story, more than likely his addiction was a product of trauma combined with negative spiritual influence. This addiction possibly separated him from his family and made him into a thief, a much more destructive effect than sitting still in a lotus position. Surely among all those patients that visited the halls of the hospital were those that became aware that something else dwelt close to their souls and mind, much like the dark passenger the psychopathic character Dexter Morgan refers to in the popular TV series Dexter as the source for his horrific urges. The effects of spiritual attachments can range from mostly benign symptoms such as bodily aches and pains with no organic origin or justification, to an inability to overcome addictions, and finally to cases of violent and sociopathic behavior. It is this dark thread that weaves in and out of these implausible stories that allows this phenomenon to exist as it has for hundreds of years. So, and it's almost, you think, okay, how much of this is superstition, how much of this is cultural belief, and how much of this is, among those people, somebody that really thinks that they are being manipulated or influenced or possessed, obsessed, what do you want to call it, by a dark entity. And remember, contrary to what a lot of people think, some of these attachments are not necessarily non-human. They could be human attachments. As in, you'll hear people with addictions, whether it's alcohol, other types of substance abuse, that their attachment is an addict that passed and is attached to them, trying to make use of their body for what they don't have anymore, which is a body to experience the high. Let's go on to the next one. This is also from my Stranger Than Stories fiction, and it's titled The Unquiet Dead Are Everywhere. And one of the first books I read, when I'm talking about myself, which gave me a new perspective on the spirit world, is Carl Wickland's 30 Years Among the Dead, which he wrote in 1924. Initially, it was a little overwhelming to realize how enmeshed living humans as incarnated beings are with discarnates. I spent a couple of days mulling it over and then plunged into Dr. Wickland's book, discarding my disbelief and, truth be told, my fear over what he was describing. Dr. Wickland was a Swedish psychiatrist who practiced at the turn of the century in Chicago. During his lifetime, he was a member of the Chicago Medical Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and chief psychiatrist at the State Psychopathic Institute of Chicago. In 1918, he moved to Los Angeles and founded the National Psychological Institute. However, long before then, he had turned away from conventional psychology of the day to the belief that obsessing spirits of the dead were at the root of many psychiatric illnesses. He used low-voltage electric shock to dislodge them, and then his wife Anna, who died in 1937, acting as a trance medium, would guide the spirit over into the light and convince them to release their hold on their human host. He worked with a group of enlightened spirits he called the Mercy Band, who assisted from the other side in guiding these lost spirits. In an age when spiritualism was rampant, Dr. Wickland warned against the use of Ouija boards and dabbling with automatic writing by persons who were not knowledgeable about what they were doing. He described several persons who, after having tried to engage in automatic writing, had started to display totally different personality traits to their own, and many had ended up being institutionalized. Prior to the attempt to connect to the spirit world, they had been normal. It was through these cases that he started to research psychic phenomena. Dr. Wickland observed, humanity is surrounded by the thought influence of millions of discarnate beings. A recognition of this fact accounts for a great portion of impotent thoughts, emotions, strange forebodings, gloomy moods, irritabilities, unreasonable impulses, and irrational outbursts of temper, uncontrollable infatuations, and countless other mental vagaries. Contrary to modern views that possession is only by demonic or non-human entities, in truth this is very rare. Most of the time this spirit is of human origin, but I guess it's not as scary as something that can be tied into horror flicks like The Exorcist. Once you acknowledge that there are many spirits who are not tied to a location or home, but might be attracted to you due to your personality or physical similarities to themselves or someone they liked, or that you might be sensitive, you learn how to take precautions, especially in keeping your aura intact. Barring a psychological or psychiatric source for these experiences, the following is a list of experiences that indicate you might have a spirit or spirits trying to influence you and insinuate themselves into your aura. 1. Feelings of being watched, hearing a voice outside of yourself, or being touched when you are by yourself. Next, sudden change in behavior and personality traits which include irrational fear, anger, and sadness. Next, sudden difficulties with relationships, disliking persons for no apparent reason, quarreling with family and friends when there was a good relationship before. Next one, fatigue, loss of energy, and foggy thinking. Next, feeling coldness or finding scratches on your body with no logical source or cause, especially when you're in a certain room or part of your house. Next, losing track of time, including memory loss. Next, recurring nightmares, disturbing awake visions or hallucinations, and seeing shadows. Next, unexpected illness that can't be diagnosed by your doctor. Next, disturbing thoughts or using words that you recognize are not your own. Next, streaks of bad luck and freak accidents. These are precautions you can take to make sure that these entities are dispelled from either following you or staying with you if they do. 1. Using a sage and copal smudge stick. 2. Spraying yourself with holy water. 3. Keeping black onyx. There are many gems that can be used for spiritual protection, but this one I've found to be inexpensive and very powerful. 4. Asking for bodyguard intervention from angelic and enlightened spiritual beings. How and why do these spirits start to follow you? First example. Drinking to excess where you pass out. This is a common reason why alcoholics who binge and have blackouts can't remember what they did or where they went. In cases of long-term alcohol intake, there's an effect on the brain. However, another reason that these spirits of deceased alcoholics, where else would you hang out after death, will elbow each other out of the way in order to jump into your energy field and use your body to taste the alcohol you are drinking. This holds true with use of drugs. Since many times addictive behavior opens your aura, not only will you initially be influenced to drink, oppression takes place which drives you to drink more and more. This is another reason why many addicts fail so many times when they try to maintain a sober lifestyle. Next one. Emotional and physical trauma, especially as a child, will leave you vulnerable. Also, not healing emotional trauma and resolving issues related to this event in your life can attract a spirit with similar emotional wounds. Next. General anesthesia during surgery can leave an unlocked door or portal to your psychic body. And hospitals are teeming with earthbound spirits who are unaware of your death date and are looking for someone nice to go home with. Next. Organ transplants can also offer a doorway for an attachment, especially if the donor died suddenly or they're having medication was unaware they died. Next. Extreme grief felt with the passing of a loved one, and saying phrases like, "Don't leave me, stay with me," can prompt a departing spirit to honor your request, and then once they're enmeshed in your aura, they are unable to depart. Food for thought, right? Well, let's go on to our other one. And the other day we were reading about haunted lighthouse in France, so I really like that. This is out of Atlas Obscura, and it's titled Haunted Houses Have Nothing on Lighthouses. Though they shared a name, it's said that two lighthouse keepers, the towering Thomas Griffith and the middle-aged Thomas Howell, didn't get along and would empty pubs with one of their heated arguments. In the winter of 1800 to 1801, the two men were stuck on the most remote island in Wales, 20 miles from shore, operating Small's Lighthouse. The brutal winter weather turned what should have been a month-long stay into a grueling, almost 5-month exile. Then 4 months into their stay, things got worse. Griffith took ill, according to Ivor Emlin's 1858 account, or perhaps he fell, as Christopher P. Nicholson writes in Rock Lighthouses of Britain. Howell hoisted up a distress flag, like an inverted Union Jack, but no help came. After weeks of suffering, Griffith died. For the next 3 weeks, Howell's only companion was Griffith's rotting corpse. He feared that casting the body into the sea would implicate him in Griffith's death. After all, everyone knew they didn't get along. So Howell, trained as a woodworker, assembled a makeshift coffin for his departed colleague and secured it to the lighthouse's railings. After 3 weeks, a massive sea swell tore the coffin apart, scattering Griffith's remains across the beach. Howell again secured Griffith's body the best he could, this time to the outside gallery. Ship after ship attempted to land on the island to relieve the desperate keepers, with no knowledge that only one remained. According to Nicholson, one ship managed to get close enough to see a man leaning motionless on the gallery next to the flag of distress, his hand waving freely as to attract attention. Unable to dock, the ship took home the news that the keepers were managing. The light was still on, it was still lit. The ship's captain realized the hand flopping in the wind belonged to a dead man. During a brief reprieve from the storms, a boat from nearby Milford made another attempt. When it successfully arrived, the sailors were overtaken by the smell of rot. Then Hal emerged, seemingly more dead than alive, an unrecognizable shell of a man. Lighthouses are full of stories like Hal and Griffith's death, isolation, madness, and in some cases actual murder. While their light can be a beacon of hope to lost sailors, darkness has often haunted them. Almost everyone seems to have a few ghostly inhabitants. As Dick Mell, former president of the Great Lakes Lighthouse Keepers Association, told Diana Stampfler in her books Michigan's Haunted Lighthouses, every lighthouse worth a grain of salt has a good ghost story. Old Victorian mansions have nothing on them. The earliest known lighthouse was one of the wonders of the ancient world, Pharos of Alexandria. Construction began sometime before 270 BC, and Pharos lit the Mediterranean for almost a millennium. With a 300 square foot base, it is estimated to have been 400 feet tall. The Roman Empire would go on to build something like 30 lighthouses around the Mediterranean and Europe's Atlantic coast. But after the 5th century or so, lighthouses disappeared from the architectural record until the later Middle Ages and early Renaissance. One of the earliest of this was the Meloria Lighthouse off the coast of Tuscany, built in 1157. Soon other coastal countries, Spain, France, Portugal, England, started constructing lighthouses too. The century between 1840 and 1940 is largely considered to be the golden age of the modern lighthouse. In the United States alone, the number of lighthouses went from 16 to roughly 1,500 during this time. The rest of the world, especially Europe and its colonies, also went through a lighthouse building frenzy, but nowhere else reached the heights that America did. Kevin Blake, a geographer at Kansas State University, has written about lighthouses, says that the buildings appeal to Americans' rugged individualism and pioneer spirit. They represent a frontier and the spirit of survival, one keeper facing the odds, weathering the seas and storms with self-sufficiency and grit. Keepers were often veterans, which added to the heroic air the job carried, according to Blake. There's also an aura of mystery associated with lighthouses, he says. As superior navigation equipment began to replace lighthouses and automated lighting systems began to replace the keepers for the ones that remain, this slow loss of change, this sense that America was losing something unique, is when ghost stories came in. Michigan, with 129, has more lighthouses than any other state. Many of those lighthouses, says Stampfler, have a ghost story or two. A lighthouse is like a safety port for ghosts, she says, and spirits of keepers, ship captains, sailors. They all can become residual spirits, drawn, as you might expect, to light. One tragic story that has always fascinated Stampfler comes from South Manitou Island Lighthouse, on a small sleepy island about 45 miles northwest of Traverse City. Between 1866 and 1878, Civil War veteran Aaron Sheridan and his new bride Julia operated the lighthouse. Julia was officially recognized as the lighthouse's assistant keeper in 1871, along with many other women who worked both as keepers and assistant keepers, even today. Over the course of 12 years there, the couple had 6 sons. Then on March 15, 1878, Aaron, Julia, and their youngest son Robert were returning from the Michigan mainland with the help of a local sailor named Christ Ankerson. The waters were calm until they neared the lighthouse, and the wind went down, and one of the old seas capsized the boat. Ankerson said later, the minutes ticked by as Christ, Aaron, Julia, and little Robert clung to the overturned boat, screaming for help. Baby Robert was the first to go, dying in Julia's arms. Then Aaron and Julia too slipped beneath the waves. Only Ankerson survived after 4.5 hours holding on to the slippery hull. The bodies of the family never washed ashore, but their ghost, according to legend, still haunts the remote lighthouse. Visitors are reported hearing the echo of voices, the sound of footsteps, and other unexplained noises coming from the causeway which connects the boarded-up keeper's residence to the light tower, writes Stampfler. Stampfler herself even visited the lighthouse and spent time slowly climbing the tower, listening for the cries of the Sheridans, without success, she says. The death of Julia, Aaron, and Robert isn't the end of the Sheridan family tragic tale. In 1893, the eldest son, Levi, or Fisk as he liked to be called, died during the collapse of the Big 4 railroad bridge near Louisville, Kentucky. George, the next oldest, spent months trying to recover Levi's body, but his brother was never found. George, following in his parents' footsteps, became a lighthouse keeper. For decades he struggled with depression, often leaving his keeper duties to his wife Sarah. In early spring 1915, George was visiting his uncle, another keeper at Grosse Pointe Lighthouse in Illinois. Several days later, on March 24, 1915, George's body was found hanging from the rafters in apparent suicide. There's a duality to lighthouses, says Stampfler, because here you have a light full of darkness. Stampfler sees many similar examples in lighthouse histories. She can cite numerous lighthouses that bear the weight of unexplained death, suicide, madness, or murder. In 1960, a well-reported murder took place at Little Ross Island Lighthouse off the southwest coast of Scotland. It all began with a father and son's day trip to the island. It was a trip the Collins had made many times before, but when they arrived on the small island on Thursday, August 18, things straight away felt weird. Usually the keepers would greet them as they disembarked, but that day the island was eerily quiet. After hearing a phone call go unanswered, my father eventually plucked up courage and went into one of the houses. David Collin, an architecture student at the time, told the BBC. He quickly became running out and said, "Get help if you can. There is a man ill in this bed." After the authorities arrived, it became clear that the middle-aged lighthouse keeper, Hugh Clark, had been shot at close range with a .22 rifle. There was only one man the evidence pointed to, Robert Dixon, the assistant keeper. Having fled the island, Dixon was the subject of a manhunt before he was arrested in Yorkshire. The trial captured national headlines and Dixon was sentenced to death, later reduced to life in prison. He didn't stay incarcerated long. 2 years into his sentence, Dixon killed himself. For Blake, there was always something sublime and dangerous about lighthouses. When you climb a lighthouse and you step into the parapet or gallery that may be 110, 160, 200 feet above the Earth's surface, it's practically a death-defying experience. Indeed, there are stories of keepers throwing themselves off lighthouses, said Blake, isolation having driven them to madness. When people think of a haunted house, a towering lighthouse on some rocky coastal bluff might not be the first thing that comes to mind, and yet it seems that almost every lighthouse bears the weight of some tragic tale. The isolation, harsh conditions, and constant work were too much for many of the people charged with keeping those lights glowing through listless nights and unrelenting storms. Perhaps it's time crumbling Victorian mansions made way for a different kind of haunted house, one that has always lighted the way for both living and the dead. So, I hope you like today's little snippet of weird and eerie news. And like I said, I'm hoping to be able to bring more on a daily basis, and also go to EERIE.NEWS. EERIE.NEWS, and not only do I have sources for the video and podcast versions of EERIE News, also we have articles there. So until next time, take care.